Hello and welcome to this CodeRage 9 session. We're going to be looking at embedding local and remote data access into your applications with IBLite. Now IBLite is part of the Interbase product range, and it really is nice and easy with Interbase. You can just embed, deploy and relax, which makes it an ideal choice for mobile and desktop applications to replace local data storage that you may be using paradox tables or other things for in the past. My name's Stephen Ball and I'm the Associate Product Manager for Interbase at Embarcadero. If you'd like to connect up with me or ask me any questions after the session, then please do feel free to email me on stephen.ball@embarcadero.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at delphiaball, or my blog post is delphiaball.co.uk. So the agenda for today is we're going to really look into what IBLite is. We'll have a quick comparison against SQLite, which is very popular in the mobile world and growingly on desktop. We'll also have a look at what you need to do to get started using IBLite. And then we'll look into using some components to create an application which will then connect to a local and also to a remote database. So we can actually, through a mobile application, Interbase is one of the very few database engines that you can connect directly to from a remote mobile device. There are specific use cases for that, and I certainly would encourage that for applications that you're running outside the corporate network. But certainly there are some instances where it's actually quite useful to be able to connect directly to the database. We will then finish off with the standard Q&A and summary to finish the session. So IBLite is a free version of Interbase. It's runtime royalty free. It's provided to you with your RAD Studio, Delphi, C++ and app method licenses. And it enables you to deploy applications that use the Interbase libraries on iOS, Android, Windows and also on Mac OS X. So with coverage of those platforms, we can build a single database application that can be debugged on Windows but deployed out to iOS, Android, Windows or Mac. And that's really helpful because it means whichever platform we need to support, the data structures that we put in place and we work with will then work across all of the platforms. Which means our data layer logic and setup is there to move with us wherever we want to go. As I say, IBLite is runtime royalty free, available on Windows, OS X, iOS and Android. It's also binary compatible on all platforms, and following on from that, you can upgrade directly to Interbase to Go, which provides the encryption support and an unlimited disk space size just by changing the license file. So you can do that once the applications are deployed. It uses the same binaries that we use to produce Interbase to Go. So literally the features are there, they're just not enabled in the free edition for encryption and unlimited disk size. However, saying that, you do get a healthy 100 meg on disk included for free with IBLite. So one of the main competitors to IBLite is SQLite, which is quite popular. There's different versions of it deployed out onto different platforms. So there are some quirks to watch out for, but SQLite is available to access by developers on most Android and iOS platforms. There is also libraries that you can download and then distribute with your applications to provide the same kind of integration that you get from IBLite to go out onto Windows and Mac as well. But in terms of what SQLite provides you, I think probably the best way to think of SQLite is a bit like a flat file on steroids. It's really meant for single read, single write. It doesn't fully support all the SQL92 standard. It certainly has the ability to have triggers in there that you can code and use, but it doesn't have stored procedures. So stored procedures is something you don't find in SQLite. Also, the user security within SQLite is down to the platform that it's on. So whilst the file is on the platform, on the device, then you may have some level of security if it's been implemented on the device. Certainly once that file is off the device, there's no security in there whatsoever. IBLite has inbuilt user security, which you can use to authenticate different users to connect into the database. Now, encryption is not built into IBLite or SQLite out of the box. There are, however, upgradable options that you can get. Obviously with IBLite, that's purchasing Interface to Go licenses. With SQLite, then you need to purchase third-party libraries to run with your database engine. And obviously, if they only support some platforms but not all of the platforms, then you may end up with cross-platform compatibility issues with SQLite that you don't have with IBLite. Okay, so let's move on. The first thing you need to do with IBLite is to download the registration file, and you simply do this. You get your serial key with your products. If you just go to reg.embarcadero.com, follow the steps online just to log into your EDN account, pop in your registration serial number and choose register. Once you have it downloaded, you can then just save it onto your public documents Embarcadero interface redistribution folder, path on the screen there, and that's the default path. And then just if you just name the registration file reg_IBLite, it's a text file already, and then once you have that there, that's the only time you need to do that. In any project that you're working with, just like most databases, you then just go and say, right, I want to enable, and you choose the Interface to Go options, and then all you need to make sure is ticked is the reg_IBLite.txt. If there is a reg_IB2go.txt, then that will get distributed if you have that ticked. Otherwise, it doesn't hurt if the tick is left ticked and you don't have the license in the redistribution. But best practice is just to remove that. And that's it. You're then ready to build your application and run it with IBLite. Now, there's full details of the steps on docwiki.embarcadero.com. If you follow the interface pages there, you'll be able to find the full steps of the registration. Now, to connect to Interface is as simple as using some of the database components that are provided with RAD Studio. So you can use the FIDAC components or you can use the IBX components. They work in a very similar manner. Here we're just showing the FIDAC ones. So you have the FIDAC connection, and then you have the query table, store procedure to connect up to. There's also a transaction component if you want to explicitly manage transactions. IBLite follows IBX follows exactly the same model, where the only difference really on the database connection component from IBX, there's an option to say that it's the embedded driver. With FIDAC, there's a physical IB driver link that you put down in the application, and there you say that you're using the Lite edition, and that connects up to the embedded drivers. The other thing that you do need to use with FIDAC is a weight cursor, a GUI X weight cursor, and that will then manage the screen cursor for you automatically. But with both, you set the parameters, you tell it where the database is, the username password is sysdba master key if you're using the default one. Obviously, we would highly recommend that you put your own username and password onto the database. So that's about it in terms of the setup. I think best really just to get in and see this in operation. Where should we start? How about let's start with our data module here. So we have a data module that we have our IBLite database connection on, which is just a TFD connection. Well, I'm not going to go through all the settings here, but I have got the login prompt set to true to enable me to just choose whichever username and password I want to connect into. But all the options for parameters, for login dialogues, transactions, and so on are set up here. You can obviously add specific transactions for specific queries as well, but that's separate components. On here, we also have our physical IB driver link, which is just selected from the tool palette. Here again, we just set the light to be true, so we're ready to use the embedded drivers. And then we have the GUIX weight cursor, and obviously we're going to be using a multi-platform development here, so we're using the FMX framework, so we just choose FMX from that, and that will just manage the cursor for the mouse if we do have any long-running transactions at any point. So within the code here, we're just using some of the properties of the FIDAC database connections to be able to check for an existing table. Here we're just checking against a list of databases that we've got from the asking for the get table names, and we're just doing that on the database connection. So on the database here, we're just doing an after connect, just caching the table names, reloading them and loading them in. And that then just allows us in code to be able to ask if a table exists pretty easily. On the form here, we have our query, which is connected to our database. And we have a bind source DB here that's connected to our query. And if I just right click here and go bind visually, let's just choose layout. And we can see here that we have the grid, and we have just underneath here a navigator. So we have the grid and the navigator both connected up to the query. So they're going to be displaying the output of the query in the grid. On the left here we have a memo, and the memo at the bottom here we have our button, which is just going to be using the memo to update the SQL in the query. And we'll just do a quick check to see if the memo text starts with select, and if it does, then we're going to run a select statement. If not, we're going to run an execute statement. Pretty simple. We also have here a table item being selected from a list view. So that list view is on one of the new components, which is the MultiView. So the MultiView here, we've got our list view tables, and that item click is here. So basically we're going to fill this list view up as we connect to the database, which is on the connect button here. As we connect up, we're going to at the end just load in to the list view the list of the table names. Then we select one, we're going to run the select star from table name and then just execute that query. So what's the other code we've got here under the button connection? First one, we're just checking to see if the database name that's been entered in contains a full colon. If it does, then we know that we're pointing to a path, a specific fixed path, so we'll use that directly. We'll skip adding any tables for the point of this demo because we're connecting to an existing database. If we're connecting to a database that we're connecting up to locally without a full colon in the path, then we're going to literally create some tables, some sample data, which we'll get to in a moment. But we're going to create this database at a local path here. So we use get documents path, which returns back a fixed address depending on iOS, Android, Windows or Mac, and then we're just going to put the database name in the interface folder. If we are on Windows, then we're just going to create a local one in CData, which avoids any authentication and advanced privileges that are required to create a file direct into the documents path here. So we're going to go ahead then literally and just create the database, and there's an option on the driver to say if the database doesn't exist, go create it, which is all we've set up that property already. And then we'll just go ahead here and if the table exists, foo, we'll skip adding some sample data in the table. If it doesn't, then we'll just add that in here. Now with the insert statement here, we're using a feature that Interbase supports, which is for ArrayDML. FIDAC allows you to create an array size on a query that you're running through. Let's just make the query a little bit clearer to see here. So if we create a table with an ID and a foo, we're then just going to insert to ID and foo a number of values. But by using ArrayDML, we can use the plural parameters and set each one in the array and then execute all together and push them in. And this is a lot faster and quicker than running, updating the parameter by name and then executing 10 times in this instance. And the same for the fee, for the sample data there. So that's about it really. It's a simple create a table, some sample data, and allow a select statement from it, show the tables that are in the database in the list, and interact with it. So let's have a look at this running. Now, one of the nice things that we can do on Windows is I'm going to just select Windows here and edit the connection. I'm going to choose my PC here, test the connection. It's failed because I've not got PA server running. So on your local machine, you'll find under C program files, Embarcadero PA server, then the version for the PA server, the install. If you've not got it installed, which it isn't by default, then you can just go to Embarcadero Studio 15 PA server and you'll find the installation files there. So you can go ahead and install that just by running next. There's also the Mac version. Once you have PA server installed, then just open it up and let's just go ahead now, select that as my profile, my target, choose run, and that's going to build and deploy all the files that I need to my local PA server. So I'm actually running this application now. I'm able to connect to my sample data here quite easily, directly locally. So if we go to Documents, PA Server, we'll be able to find a Scratch directory, and then in here we'll be able to find my deployed application with my to-go and my license files and so on, all in place. So you can just copy that and you can use that to deploy your application out. It copies all the files in the right location for you. So here, if I just change this to foo, or maybe just change this to select, let's do accounts, and we can see our 10 records. There we are, that's a nice easy connection to our local database. Now this is a database that's using IBLite to be a server. I can also use IBLite to be a client and connect to a remote database, so let's just go and connect to a database that I have locally. And here, this isn't a database that I've deployed with the application, it's one that's running on the local machine. So if I go to see data, you can see here's my database. But I can see that I'm actually getting the loop back here if I just open up the server manager and stop this connection and try connecting again. I'm going to get a timeout because it's trying to connect back to that instance of the server that's not running at the moment. Well, it will time out eventually. So let's just restart my server because we're going to use that in a demo a little bit later on. And I'm going to go and deploy this now out to Mac. So before I deploy it to Mac, I just want to show you where you set up the options for deployment. So under Project Deployment, and this is the same for Windows, for Mac, for iOS, for Android, you can add feature files. And here we have Interbase to Go, which you just select. And then for the different platforms, you can just come in and modify respectively. I've just taken out the reg_ib2go.txt because I don't want to deploy that file if I did have it on my machine. If I just go here, see users, let's go to public documents, Embarcadero, Interbase, redistribution, and then the current flavor of Interbase that you're running. You can see here's the reg_IBLite TXT file. This is the one that I've saved down when I've done the registration at reg.embarcadero.com. And that here is selected to be picked up and deployed with my application. However, I'm not deploying the IB2Go because I want to use IBLite here. If you want to deploy a database as well, you can just come in here and add the file, go select the file that you want to deploy. The one thing that I would say is it's always easy once you've deployed the files to come and have a look here. You can see that we've got the assets internal Interbase. That gives you the path that the Interbase files are going to be put to on an Android device. On OS X, its content, Mac OS Interbase. On iOS, we can actually see its startup documents Interbase, so Interbase license as well. They're the base paths that you're going to be distributing to. So you can actually, without having to remember them, you can go copy those onto your database file that you add in for the remote path, so it copies to the correct location through the startup copy. Okay, so let's get back to running this out onto the Mac. Let's just hit run. Now I've got PA Server set up and running on my Mac. So here we are now on the Mac. Let's go ahead and just connect to a local database. We can see we've got some data here. In fact, I've got some data that I updated earlier in a previous demo, so let's just go ahead and modify this. That's now kept the updated changes. We can now see what we can connect to local data. We're using IBLite for that, but now let's try and connect and use IBLite to be a client and connect across the network to our remote database. So just check the IP address here was 192, so 172.16.116.192, and then the full colon to indicate that's the name and of the machine we want to connect to, or the IP address, and now the database that we want to connect to, so C data, and then our original database on the other machine. Now we can see there's our data being picked up from our Windows machine out on the Mac. So that's great. We've now got a client or a local embedded database, which is great for being able to kind of cache data locally in. But what about getting it onto iOS and Android? Well, we can do that. Let's just go ahead and we'll run out to the iOS device here. I'm just going to refresh my screen here. It should bring up my iPad, which it looks like it has. So let's just select that. I don't need to make any additional changes. I'm just going to hit run. I am going to just log on to my iPad, and as that runs, the only thing that we will need to do is just change our the network settings I have in my VM, which I'll do in just a second. Let's just go ahead up here and change my network to be bridged, so it's on the network. And we're just going to go and open up a reflector here, which will allow us to show what's going on my iPad. And let's just check what our new IP address is here, 1075.27. Okay, so let's just show, first of all, connecting to some local data on the iPad. So here we have embedded data working on the iPad, and if we now go ahead and change this to be, what is it, 1075.27, 1075.27, and full colon. And now let's put in the path for the database on the remote machine. Let's just try that again. I'm missing a full colon. There we are. So there we are. We're now connected to our remote data as well. So the use case really for this is, I'd say specifically it's around kind of kiosks where you're using tablets, or if you're always connecting to data that's local to you on the network. I really wouldn't recommend a direct connection to the database for a general application that's meant for use outside, because REST is much better at dealing with the connection disconnection approach that you will get moving between cell point and hotspots. But for a local client, then this is perfectly fine to be able to do this. So I hope you've enjoyed having a look at Interbase IBLite and seeing the power and capabilities that you have there with Interbase. Obviously, it's great being able to have a single database platform that we can run across all platforms that we develop on, and this gives us complete end-to-end coverage, easy porting of our applications across to multiple platforms as well. Really means that we can write our data layer logic once and get it everywhere. And with easy upgrade options to move to full encryption and unlimited disk space support, there really is no reason why you shouldn't be using IBLite today in your applications, especially if you're looking to replace any paradox tables or looking for solutions for proper data storage on mobile and desktop applications. Now, before we get to some Q&A, I just want to give a quick shout out for the @Interbase account on Twitter. We have some really exciting stuff that we are going to be bringing to you later through the year. Some of it you may have seen earlier on the product address, but please do keep in touch with us on the Twitter account, because we're going to be announcing product releases and exclusive access to some of the betas and so on through the Twitter account there, as well as the community at Embarcadero.com. But I know a number of you on Twitter nowadays, so please do follow us on @Twitter @Interbase on Twitter. But now Q&A.
Great. So yeah,
because it's the same underlying Interbase database file format, and it's the same Interbase engine. SQL database server engine. Yeah.
Yeah. So the IBLite is included with Pro, and all versions of Delphi have IBLite.
Because, again, you're on the local machine.
On the local machine.
Right? You're on the same IP address. As long as it's not, imagine you would put IBLite somewhere else and you would try to talk to it on a different IP address. You wouldn't be able to do that.
Right.
It would see that it's on a different machine than the calling system.
And then Interbase to go, again, is with Pro, but it requires separate license for Interbase to go.
Well, you always just have the Interbase DLL or dilib on Windows or Mac.
Mm-hmm.
And you just include the license key. And if you have a IBLite license key, which is free, or if you have an Interbase to go license key, it turns on more functionality automatically. You don't have to change the way you program or replace a DLL or anything else. It's all there.
Okay. What about using FireDAC to connect to SQL Server?
That's fine. You can connect to SQL Server, but again, SQL Server is going to be running on some other machine.
Right.
I'm not sure what happens if you're running SQL Server Express Edition.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think
because that still runs
locally.
It's on the same machine, but I think it's running in a separate process. I'm not sure.
Okay.
As opposed to running in your like DLLs get loaded in your process.
Right.
Even though you're using Interbase like IBLite or Interbase as a desktop, DLLs are in the same process. But I don't think SQL Server Express Edition or Oracle XE, it's running in its own process. It's just feature limited in 2 gigabytes or whatever. So you'd still need the client server add-on pack to talk to a SQL Server database. I think I'll double check, because it's running in a separate process. It's not running in process.
Is that the differentiation?
It's either it's a remote database or separate process. That's my understanding, but I'll double check with Steven. But that's my understanding. Now, if you're talking from FireDAC through ODBC to an Access database, ODBC is a DLL kind of system, and Access is just a table. I mean, it's more than a table, I guess, but it's a single file, MDB, whatever the extension is.
Here's the list of the databases here for Professional Edition. Gives you access to Interbase, Interbase to go, SQLite, Interbase on localhost, MySQL embedded, MySQL Server on localhost, Advantage database local engine, Postgres on local engine, Firebird embedded, and Firebird on localhost.
Yeah. So Microsoft's running in a separate, even if you run on the same, like imagine you put everything on a server. Yeah, it's all running on the same machine, but they're running in a sense as separate processes.
Yeah, and so it lists SQL Server and Oracle both are either
client server add-on pack,
or
enterprise and above.
Yep. Okay.
And the FireDAC enforces that. It looks to see what you're trying to connect to and says, sorry, That's why the distinction local host for some of those that are TCP IP based.
Right.
So
Adam wants to know, can you host Interbase in the cloud, like Azure or Google?
Yes, we've put Interbase on Amazon AWS, for example, and there's notes about that. If you go to the help and or doc for Interbase, we have notes about how, for example, you can run Interbase on and how you connect, because there's certain logins. There's a login process, but Azure is just a Windows instance if you run it as the app level versus the data storage and messaging systems and so on.
I don't think Google gives you a Linux or Windows instance anymore.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at Google App Engine in a while. Again, if you can get one of those operating system instances to put stuff in that Interbase has versions for, like there's a Linux version. There was a Solaris version. I think there still is. I don't think there's a Berkeley BSD type thing, but Linux, Solaris, Mac OS 10. I'm not sure about HPUX. You can go and see the different platforms that Interbase supports these days in Interbase XE3.
Let's see. I just was there. Windows, OS 10, Linux, Solaris.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yep.
And of course, iOS and Android because of IBLite and Interbase to Go.
Yep. It says IBLite competes with Firebird embedded on Windows and Mac platforms. What are future plans concerning mobile?
For what? IBLite's already on mobile.
Yeah, IBLite's already on mobile. I don't know that Firebird's got...
I don't know.
Yeah.
Look, we're not the Firebird group. Go ask them.
Is already on mobile.
Yeah. IBLite's been there since, what, XE5, I think.
Well, it was on iOS and XE4.
Okay.
And Android and XE5, so.
Yeah, I guess Android and iOS and XE5 for both. But, yeah. And Interbase to Go as well. Uh-oh, Jim's smiling. I don't know what that means. I don't see the screen because I didn't bring my computer. So,
David had asked if Interbase IBLite worked with App Builder. I said, App Method? He said, yeah, that's what I wrote.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
FireDAC is the only data access in App Method. There's no BDE, no DBGo, no Data Snap, no DB Express. I don't think so. I don't think there's DB Express either. I think it's FireDAC.
Well, there's Data Snap in App Builder or App Method.
There's no client data set. You have to use FDMem table in FireDAC.
You use FDMem table, but you can use Data Snap with it though, but just not client data set.
Not client data set.
Right. Okay, does Interbase support merge replication?
Not replication, and we always ask the question of what you mean by replication. There's no replication engine or server. It has a multi-generational architecture. It has journaling. It has secure journaling, so you can journal all the changes, and then you can play the journals to points in time for point-in-time recovery and so on. But it always depends. I always ask people what they mean by replication because there's different replication engines for different databases that do different things.
And then the new thing with
change views.
Change views.
Yeah. So again, when the replays are up, watch Stephen Ball's Interbase product address Interbase keynote, and he talks about the change view technology that we're coming out with as a way to keep track of and get access to, subscribe to just the changes so that you can use that to do things like updating databases, including local databases on your mobile device, for example, without having to refetch all the rows. It'll only give you the changes, like this row, this column of this row in this table was changed. So you get one little element. Maybe it's a varchar 20. That comes over. And maybe that column of that row had one, column change. You get that. You don't have to refetch everything. But again, I will get the replays up as fast as humanly possible. We say 1 to 2 weeks, but I'm pretty good about sitting down when I don't want to do anything else and taking the recordings. Sometimes I have to get updates of the recordings from the presenters because they saw something even after they gave it to us because they watched it themselves finally, maybe.
Yeah.
And say, I want to fix that. So, and then I stick the Q&A, the live Q&As on the end. Where it was the common presentation across both tracks, I'll try to put both the Q&As from things that were asked in here and things that were asked in C++ when it was the exact same, like Interbase product address.
Okay,
yeah.
Excellent.
That way you see all the questions from both a Delphi perspective and a C++ builder perspective. And they may be different, unless there's duplication of the same questions, and I try to not duplicate them too much unless it takes too long.
So David says, irregardless, it looks ideal. Company president says, give it a try. Let's see if it works for field data collection. For mineral exploration, maybe I can quit paying R&D from my own pocket. Great.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, again, IBLite, and then if you want to go to Interbase to Go because you have to encrypt data and you need more size and whatever, that's the whole point. You get full NC SQL 92 to carry around with you, and it's the same architecture. You don't have to write in a different way. Just, again, one transaction active at a time. At least you have one transaction. SQLite, you lock the database or unlock it, right? And it has an encryption mechanism. But, again, if you want to bring in and move the database to Solaris servers and connect through Wi-Fi or multi-tier, it's the same database, same metadata. Just copy the files. The only difference in IBLite is 100 megabyte max.
Yeah.
So it's great for bringing the metadata over and using the same mechanism, same components, same architecture for doing data collection, and then just send it up to a central Interbase server, for example, to do updates through DataSnap or EMS server or whatever you might do architecturally.
So Adam asked if there's a link talking about how to host Interbase on Azure or in the cloud.
I would go look. I know we've done it, and I know it's doable. I'm not sure if it's in the documentation. So what you can do is there's an Interbase documentation. If you go to docs.embarcadero.com, DOCS, there's documentation, including the language manual, the operation guide, the installation guide, and so on. Is there a doc wiki? I think there is. I'm not sure. But I know if you go to docs.embarcadero.com that there's an Interbase section with all the documentation, either in help format and other formats, including SQL language guide and so on.
So, okay.
I guess in Google search, Interbase Azure or Interbase Amazon Webs, Amazon Cloud, or because we've done it. You can. I have an instance that I run on AWS that is a Windows instance. It cost me 4 cents an hour, I think, and I use it for demoing. And Pavel has his own thing in the cloud. He's probably using the West European cloud for Amazon. I'm running on Northern California, but then when I'm overseas, I spin up like an Ireland one, so I don't have to come all the way to Northern California to get to my samples and data.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it, but I bet if you search a little longer, you probably find it. Yeah. I just didn't see it quick enough. And David says you already have the database on IB server. So yeah, if you already got database on IB server, you might as well have
just copy the IB file, or if you're still using the GDB extension, just copy it.
Yep, copy it to your mobile.
Well, unless it's an old Interbase 6 or 7 or something. Mm-hmm. There was a time, and I forget which one, whether it was Interbase XE or one of those where finally everything was common. Before then, you used to have to use the backup utility and pass the portable flag to and then it would create a portable backup image that you would then move to the other server and restore, and it saw that it was the portable version. Now you just copy the IB file or the GDB file. It's your choice. Historic Groton database, Groton Data Systems was GDS. So the history is GDS, why GDS 32DLL, before it became part of Ashton Tate and then became part of Borland and then became part of Embarcadero, the company that built what became Interbase was Groton Data Systems, GDS, out of, I think it was in Massachusetts, like somewhere, Cape Cod or whatever. And because Groton is like a port area and coastal area. And then, and GDB was the GDS or Groton Data Systems database. So GDB, when we renamed Interbase, we started using the IB extension. But again, it's the same. Doesn't matter. It works both ways. I think you can even put any extension you want, because Interbase will look and see if it's an Interbase database. I think I should try that, but it really looks to see what's inside to know if it's an Interbase database.
There's a question about where to get the code from his presentation. I'll give you a link to his blog here. And
yeah, Stephen said he would put it on his blog.
Yeah.
In my session over in C++. His
blog. Yeah. Which is delphiaball.co.uk.
Yeah, that's his external blog, yeah. And then we're trying to feed all the external blogs from employees into community blog. We've given all the URLs. I don't know if they've turned that on yet, but we can pull external feeds both on WordPress. The old blog we're still keeping because people are still looking for that URL and RSS feed versus the Community 3.0 blog, which is built on top of Joomla. Yeah.
So David says that he's got the Interbase XE version, so it's going to be compatible with copying the file locally?
Should be. I think XE, I'll double check again when there was no portable or transportable or differences in the metadata and the internals.
Yeah. He says he's been using Interbase since it was on SCO Unix.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, there was several versions back. We had HPUX at a time. I know as well. But one way to tell is to take the Interbase data. If you don't have XE7, get the trial, copy the database, and use IB console to see if you can open it.